welcome, Andreas. Thank you for accepting our invitation. For those who are joining us to listen to this vodcast, Andreas Schleicher is the Director of the Education and Skills at the OECD, and he is also the originator of the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competences, the well-known Program for International Student Assessment, and other international measurements. And I'd like to welcome you.
Thanks so much for hosting me, Janet.
Thanks. So today we are focused on adult competences and particularly transversal skills and competences. And I'll have to note that there is no one definition of what transversal skills and competences are. So I'd like to ask you, Andreas, how the OECD defines those transversal competences.
Yeah, we typically distinguish between job-specific knowledge and skills, things that you can apply in one specific area, and transversal skills that you can apply in multiple areas, that you can transfer from one context to another context. So literacy, numeracy are obvious examples for that. But there's no sharp dividing line, I think. But it's helpful, I think, to think in terms of the generality of the skills that we have.
Right. So there's also an element of social-emotional competences that are important in different settings.
Yeah, I would say transversal skills do include a whole range of cognitive, social, and emotional skills. I think at the workplace, can you work with people who are different from you? Can you think for yourself? All of those things are important and are part of the mix that make people successful at the workplace. That, by the way, is also the reason why in the latest round of PIAAC, or the survey of adult skills, we did include a range of social and emotional aspects.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you're measuring those? Because that's not really necessarily self-evident.
Yeah, actually, you could argue it's not self-evident how we measure numeracy and mathematical skills. It's just that when we look at different dimensions of skills, we have to adapt our measurement technologies. Now, if we think about measurement as tests, then social emotional skills are hard to capture. But if we take a more open view on measurement, we can actually capture a whole range of social emotional skills. I give you an example from the other end of the spectrum, from small children. Someone once asked me when I talked about, social emotional skills among kindergarten children, show me that you can measure empathy for a 5-year-old child and then we can talk. And actually we did that. We just gave them a story on a tablet where they had to, look at different characters, and we could see their reactions, their responses, and it actually turned out to be quite reliable measure, but it was not a test. It was just a different way of capturing information. Some of the information we look at through self-reported skills. That is perhaps not as objective, but often a quite valid way of capturing people's behavior. These days, actually, process data are quite powerful. Your mobile phone knows probably a lot more about your social emotional skills than you imagine yourself. And we just need to become better to harvest those kinds of data and translate them into meaningful metrics.
So it might be useful actually for people who are not as familiar with PIAAC to describe how the tests are administered.
Yeah, PIAAC is a household survey. So we go to people's homes and we administer computer-based tests to them and also ask them a lot of background questions. That is very challenging in itself. Logistically, you have to take a representative sample of adults, and then you have to get to their homes, and that's where the difficulties actually start. Convincing someone, particularly people who may not have so high levels of skills, who may not have been so successful in school, to convince them actually that they can make a good contribution to the world by revealing what they're good at, where they struggle with. It is very, very challenging, but we did succeed in the first round of PIAAC, and we are now conducting a second wave. And so once people agree to this, we give them a computer-based tests where they look at problem-solving tasks, literacy-related tasks, numeracy-related tasks, and a range of questions around social-emotional skills. And then those questions are recorded, and later on they are scored and scaled so that we can compare them within and across countries and also across social groups. And the minimum sample is about 5,000 adults, so it's quite a large group of people taken through, representing the entire population. So that's basically the methodology behind it.
That's internationally or within each country?
Within each country. And sometimes when countries, look at this for different regions, they'll have to boost the sample correspondingly. It's a very resource-intensive effort, but actually it's our only way of understanding something about the skills of adults. Because you might think, oh, well, people got degrees and qualifications, but, they represent the long gone past of what you did once in your lifetime. We forget things, we lose skills that we do not use. So try to, answer a test that in mathematics that you could do at age 15, and actually it might be quite difficult. And we gain a lot of skills through, not formal education often, but the way of working and so on. And so taking a real snapshot is our only way to assess not what people qualified once in their life, but what they actually know and can do. And so it is really, really important. It's the world's only metric, really, to capture skills.
And this is, how many cycles of PIAAC have there been so far?
We're now in the second one. We have
second cycle.
Well, it depends what you call cycle. We've administered the first wave in different kind of contexts, but we had basically one PIAAC assessment, and now we have a second one going through several iterations. And we can't administer it in all countries at the same time. Some countries need more time and so on, but it is basically the second big implementation 10 years after we did the first one.
Okay, great. And then, of course, lots of things have happened in those 10 years, so it'll be quite interesting to see. So the results for that will be published in 2024 or 2025?
Yeah.
I think there were some significant findings regarding transversal skills in the first round or in interim assessments that you've done. Can you talk a little bit about what you found and what that has meant for the work at OECD in terms of addressing adult skills and competences?
Yeah, I think the first finding that might not be so surprising for experts, but certainly for policymakers, is how many poorly skilled adults we have in our populations. People who have elementary problems reading and calculating. And we're not talking about 1 or 2%. We're talking about, in some countries, a good quarter of adults. And you almost wonder how they manage actually in a society that is increasingly relying on people's, literacy, numeracy skills, and so on. So it's the first finding, huge distribution. Second finding is, often formal education doesn't capture the skills of people well. I'll give you an example. A Japanese high school graduate turned out to have better numeracy skills than an American college graduate. So, we often value people on formal credentials. We underappreciate, skills from different countries, but also from different educational pathways. People who have not gone the academic track, but might have acquired a good set of skills in other ways, are often not valued for that in our societies. But actually, there's a very interesting kind of dynamic between formal qualification and skills. Another thing that, was quite striking when we look at school tests like PISA, we always find that, girls, women are doing a lot better in reading than men. That pattern reverses actually. And when you look at older age cohorts, you can see often men being in an advantage. And one explanation is that simply men often have more literacy intensive jobs, and that they actually catch up, develop literacy skills, which they use quite intensively at the workplace. So it's just one hypothesis, but sort of gender patterns that we took for granted from school do not play out later on. Socioeconomic pattern, that's not so much a surprise, that you can see sort of the social context from which people come quite clearly mirrored in in the knowledge and skills which they have. So inequalities in education. But for me, what was encouraging there is that you could see some countries that have been very good in moderating those inequalities. So we often take this as a kind of inevitability. People from poor backgrounds will have poor skills. But I think what these data very clearly shows that the world is no longer divided between rich and well-educated nations and people and poor and badly educated ones. You can see a lot of kind of differences, and many countries actually have become quite good in moderating inequality in skills. There is, of course, a whole range of analysis showing the link between skills and economic outcomes. Skills being a really good predictor for people's employment and earnings, but also for some, social outcomes. When you look at civic engagement and skills, as measured by the survey of adult skills, quite closely related. When you look at trust, when you look at political efficacy, so people at the high end of the skills spectrum see themselves as actors in our society. They believe, they can do something, whereas people at the low end of the skills spectrum often see themselves as, objects, powerless in political processes. So I think very, very interesting range of findings here.
That is really interesting. And it also reminds me in our interviews with our, for the Transval-EU project, the people implementing the pilots noted that one of the most important things about guidance and validation of transversal skills was empowerment. So the fact of measuring it made people more aware and conscious of what they have and what they need to develop. And so that empowerment aspect was highly, highly important.
Yeah, and I think that empowerment aspect works at different levels. First of all, at the level of the individual. If you just don't have, certain degrees and qualifications, but you actually have those skills, it can give you a sense of self-efficacy if you know. So I think that's really important. The same is for institutions. Many employers may not be remotely aware of the knowledge and skills and the talent they actually have, because once again, they valued people on entrance qualifications. They haven't really figured in, the upskilling and reskilling that may have gone on. And then certainly countries, public policy can do a lot about this. I mean, that's the great thing, skills, knowledge and skills are an outcome, of educational processes. So we can change those patterns. So I do think empowerment, at multiple layers is really, really important here.
Great. And it sounds like there are many opportunities for mutual learning across countries, including from countries that you would not have thought as the traditional leaders, as you've said.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually always interesting in these findings that, wealth and is correlate, but actually doesn't predict far from everything that we see in those outcomes. And that's actually, I would always say, one of the most interesting findings, looking at individuals from maybe more disadvantaged contexts or countries doing really, really well, and then see, what are the predictors for their success, what makes them resilient. And that's where peer learning comes in. But also when you look at the strengths in the relationship between skills and outcomes, I think there is a lot that countries can do, not only to produce better skills, but also deploy their skills more actively, giving people better chances to use the skills they have. I'll give you an example. You look at a country like Japan, it's at the top end of the spectrum when it comes to the skills that people actually have. But, in Japanese workplaces, they are highly segregated, segmented. Women often don't get a chance to use their skills. So productivity in Japan is not that great. They have that amazing human potential, but the economy is not using that really well. You look at the other end of the world, you go to the United States, and you can see a country where the skill supply is actually quite patchy. On the survey of adult skills, the United States does so not really well. But, the economy is very good in extracting value from the skills that people have, translating better skills into better jobs, better lives of people. And that is important as well. And a survey like PIAAC allows us to see both sides of the equation.
I'm not sure if it's too early to ask you this. Have there been any trends from between the first cycle and the data that you're gathering now in the last 10 years that you could pinpoint?
Yeah, we will only, have data by the end of 24, really, for the second survey cycle. But what's obvious that the context of, literacy and numeracy has changed. Digitalization, has posed. Literacy is a very different concept 10 years later. 10 years ago, most of the material that you read was still on, paper. It was still predefined. When you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in an encyclopedia, you could trust the answer, you find that to be true. That context has radically changed. You look at ChatGPT, you look at, Google, you ask a question, you get 100,000 answers, and nobody is going to tell you what's right and what is wrong, what is true and what is not true. Literacy is no longer about extracting knowledge. Literacy is now about constructing knowledge, a very different kind of skill set. So in a way, you can say the demands on people have massively changed. And the extent to which, people are living up to that, we're going to know in a year's time.
I wanted to ask you how you work with employers and other consultants to design the PIAAC tool and decide what's the most important to measure.
Yeah, very good question. Actually, that's what takes longest in the survey of adult skills. Like the administration is, a formal process, but actually we spend about 4 or 5 years to think through with the users of skills. Now, what aspects of literacy, numeracy, problem solving, social emotional skills are relevant in what context, in what culture, and then to operationalize those, to build, metrics, questionnaires, surveys around that. It is a very, very complex and lengthy process to understand, to anticipate also the evolution of skill demand. The survey is done every 10 years, so the data that we have needs to sort of live for another decade. And so we need to actually not just be good at asking today's employers what you need now, but actually to anticipate the evolution of labor demand, to anticipate, what technology might do to this. And so we don't know to what extent we'll do that, get that right, but I think we put a lot of effort into understanding this and then designing the instruments.
Right. And given the diversity of sectors and needs, how do you come to a baseline across?
Yeah, that's why we basically focus on transversal skills. We have not really looked at job-specific skills. We look at skills that people agree are sufficiently broad that they can be used in different contexts, different cultures, and so on. We also actually, for the first time in this latest survey, administer an employers module, where actually we ask employers more directly about the demand side of skills. And so I think that also will help us better understand this. Now, but yeah, if you go into job-specific skills, you run into 2 risks. One is that you can't really compare easily, and the second is that you're going to be pretty quickly out of date because those job-specific skills will evolve much more rapidly than generic skills.
Great. And could you point to any specific issues related to different age groups? So, for example, I'm thinking of the transition from the findings of PISA into PIAAC, and then as people get older, you have mentioned the use it or lose it aspect, but are there other aspects that are worth highlighting for the different age groups?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, we have designed the survey of adult skills such that we can actually make some comparisons with PISA. And so you can see basically how the 15-year-olds that were assessed by PISA come out subsequently in a kind of quasi-longitudinal design. That's a really interesting part. But we also can make comparisons across age cohorts. And in fact, that's one of the most sobering findings for a country like the US or the UK, where we see that the people moving into the job market, you take the 16 or 24-year-olds, are actually no longer better skilled than those moving into retirement. So you could see actually how a couple of countries have basically been frozen in the development of skills. In other parts of the world, you go to Singapore, the older age cohort was very poorly skilled because Singapore used to be a harbor without any kind of education system. But you look at the young generation and they are, leading everybody. So actually, I think intergenerational differences tell you a lot about the evolution of education or not in education in a country.
Right. And so you can also feed that back into school policy,
Mhm. Yeah, I also think, again, when you look at the skills of older adults, what you can see actually is what is actually being used in the workplace, in life, and what has, what relationships to economic and social outcomes, and that can inform curriculum design, curriculum implementation, and many other things.
I also understand that you work closely with the labor division in OECD. And so can you describe a little bit about how the findings from PIAAC feed into policy recommendations and the work done there in terms of what sectors outside of formal education can be doing?
Yeah, this is actually one of the most interesting aspects of the survey. It's an area where internally in the OECD, the education and labor departments work very closely together, but also across countries. When you go to the governing board that is managing the survey, you'll have representatives both from education and labor ministries. Because again, skills are everybody's business. You have education that cares about how to develop the right skills, particularly at the beginning of people's lives. Labor cares very much about, how we use the skills, how we deploy them effectively, how to make sure that people get a chance to use their skills. Also, how we, do some upskilling for the unemployed. So this is an area where actually both sides are really, really important. And that makes this project for us at the OECD very interesting, but also for countries very relevant. Often, education and training and labor policies are not so well connected. We can see, we have many young people getting university degrees, and at the same time, employers say they cannot find the people with the skills they need. So there is often a gap between education and labor. And so I think the survey is a great example how we can connect the two worlds.
Great. And also there's the issue of daily life with so many disruptions and changes, as you were saying about ChatGPT and different ICT impacts and so on and so forth. The lifelong learning approach at OECD. Can you talk a little bit about how you address people's needs in daily life?
Yeah, that's one of the most important aspects for us here, that in the past, you used to learn to do the work, and now learning is the work. Basically, our continuous, ability, our willingness to, learn, to unlearn, to relearn when the context changes. Now, that's almost more defining than the skill set with which you get into work. Can you actually, do you see, your horizon? Do you see the kind of maybe skills gaps that you have? Do you put the time and effort into this? As humans, we always value the present over the future. And it's actually in school, you have a captive audience. You can, educate people. But once people get out of formal education, it takes a lot to motivate people to learn. It takes also strong policies, making learning granular, giving people signals that are small enough that actually smaller investments in learning will pay off in some ways, and micro-credentials, tools like this. And so I think public policy is very, very important. One of the most sobering findings from the survey from the first round was that, 60% of adults do not see a need to engage in lifelong learning. They say, well, it may be important for some, but not for me. So they do not see that their own horizon is changing. And what we see is that people with, advanced education, high levels of skills, they're interested, they, continue to learn, but people with lower levels of skills do often not. So in a way, lifelong learning currently often amplifies initial skill differentials rather than moderating them. Think about, a truck driver. 5 years from now, maybe we will no longer have humans driving trucks. But what is happening with these people today? Are they, investing in, new kinds of skill sets that will enable open new job opportunities for them? I'm not so sure, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. Part of it goes back to education. Those who did not succeed in school because school did not fit them really well, may not be so easily to motivate to go back to formal learning. So I think there's a lot that needs to happen to get more people to learn and to recognize those increments in learning in a way that it does make a difference for them.
Great. So I'd like to ask you, because we've been talking a lot about the macro level, and of course, for Transval, the audience we're trying to reach is the on-the-ground practitioners in guidance and validation for adult learners. Do you have some specific thoughts that you'd like to share in terms of what countries need to think about? Because the landscape is so heterogeneous across countries, and the guidance and validation practitioners are not always professionalized. What would you advise countries to think about in terms of helping this sector further develop?
Well, transitions from education to work and back, are becoming more complex. They're becoming longer. They are becoming more convoluted, and understanding, being able to navigate is becoming increasingly important. My first, lesson really is to start very early. The most important career decisions you do not make when you graduate from school, you make when you start school. That's actually when many of the social disparities that we observe open up, because kids from wealthier backgrounds, they know the world, they have people who tell them about it, and kids from poor background, have often a very myopic view on the world around them. Their parents may not have the greatest jobs, their friends not, and so they may say, well, why should I, study trigonometry in school? So I think actually starting early on is really, really important to give children a better understanding of the real world, and make learning more relevant, make learning more authentic. But then, guidance in the transition, from education to work becomes crucially important. And, once again, guidance professionals should have a really good understanding of the people, what the people in front of them know and can do. And that's actually not so trivial, because once again, their formal certificates will only tell a very small part of the story. So having really, really good data that tell people, what are the knowledge and skills, and what is the opportunity set related to that. And if I invest in additional skills, what additional opportunities will I have? You want those guidance professionals to have a deep understanding of that, and to be able to make a good case for people. Also, guidance is not just showing directions. Guidance is also about motivating people to invest more and better in learning, invest more upfront, not just learn to improve your current job, that's the job-related training, but learn to educate, learn for the next job. And I think that's really, really important. And last but not least, guidance is often something that we do in times of crisis. People have got out of the job market, they, have for different reasons. Guidance needs to be a much more natural and normal process that, accompanies us throughout our lives. And that may not always be people. It could be, technology could play a better role, helping you understand different worlds of work, helping you understand your skill set. But I think that kind of lifelong company that you need from a professional to help you, shape your learning pathways is something that I think will be incredibly important in future. The faster the world changes, the faster workplaces changes, the more you need really, really people who have the data at their fingertips, and who are able actually to understand what motivates people and how they can help them, capture those opportunities.
Right. And it also implies that at the macro level for policymakers, how important it is to make sure what we measure and how we set out the progression levels really matches what's needed in the current landscape.
Yeah, and I think the progression levels in its, we've got to be a lot more demanding on people. Often we have this idea, people who are not been so successful, we just, do some bits and chunks of vocational education and training. And I think, the future will be incredibly demanding on people. And there is the risk that we see in growing polarization on the skill side, on the job opportunities, and learning is the antidote for that. Learning is our only tool to actually create a more level playing field and ensure that people can live up to their potential. And I think professionals who, apart from teachers in the school, professionals who, help people find, those opportunities and get ready for them throughout their lives will be incredibly important.
Right. And as you were saying earlier, AI is not taking over the role of people in the world, that the skills and competences to be able to know the quality of what we're getting from different AI programs is really important.
Yeah, I mean, AI is not a magic power. AI is just an incredible amplifier and an incredible accelerator. It's going to amplify, great capabilities and great tools, and it amplifies disadvantage in the same way. I think the way we deploy it really is a human decision, and I think public policy is really important to this. But I see enormous potential on this. You can actually, with AI, learn things that you couldn't learn in the past. You can do a medical operation in a virtual world. You can get real-time data about your skill deficits, your skills, your learning progress, and so on. You can get good advice on job opportunities through technology. So I think we should leverage that potential, but not assume it's going to be a magic power. What certainly means is that the kind of things that are easy to teach will become increasingly easy to digitize. I think AI pushes us to think harder what makes us as human, and I think again that's professionals are incredibly important.
Yeah, and also lots of positive implications for immigrants needing to develop their language skills, for example, and having tools to help various aspects where AI can really accelerate our progress with various daily needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI has this huge potential to make learning more personal, more gradual, more interactive, more dynamic, more fun. And but there's no automaticity in that. Learning is always a social and relational process. We always learn from and with people. And I think
and different kinds of knowledge need different kinds of tools. What do you see as needs for further research in the area of adult transversal skills and competences?
I think we need a lot of research on measuring harder to measure skills. If you think about creativity, if you think about some of the social emotional skills, things that we know are incredibly important, are very hard to measure. I think that's where research is needed. We need a better understanding of the factors that impact those knowledge and skills and attitudes. Cross-sectional data only get you that far. We need to complement those kinds of data with other types of research that give us a better understanding of the causal nature of some of those relationships. So I think there is a wealth of research that is really important. In a way, there is a huge imbalance between what we know about learning early in life and the little we really know about how adults develop their skills or not, and what use that has for them and the economies.
Right. Okay, great. Then let me thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge and everything that you've been learning through PIAAC and your other research.
Well, thanks again for hosting me, Janet.
Okay, thanks a lot.